Hello, my name is Ruth Silverman, and I'm a Learning Services Coordinator at the Student Learning Commons at Simon Fraser University. Your instructor, Kate Parnell, asked me to make a recording to let you know about some time management tools and strategies. So throughout this presentation, you will get a chance to stop the video and try some time management tools for yourself. So right now I'm making the recording on the Burnaby campus of SFU, and it's also on that campus that Fraser International College is located. So it's important for us to acknowledge that we share some space on the unceded traditional territories of Coast Salish people, specifically the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Coquitlam nations. At the Student Learning Commons, we recommend that students adopt a 4-schedule strategy. So that consists of making a big picture, semester at a glance calendar, which is what I will be telling you about in a minute, and you will get a chance to actually make your own. And then also the master weekly schedule, which leads into a weekly schedule. So we recommend that students have some sort of scheduling system to see on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis what's coming up for them. And also have a to-do list of their few priorities for the day. The first calendar system that we recommend you using is the semester at a glance calendar. And you can see from the picture that it shows all 4 months of a semester at the same time. So Kate has provided you with a 4-month calendar from September to December. And I realized that based on the time that you're getting it, most or maybe all of September will have passed. And there's no point in putting things on the calendar that have already passed. So just schedule things from the present moving forward for the term. So semester at a glance calendar is useful for a number of reasons, which is why it's the one that we want you to make as part of this session. It's really useful for keeping track of your deadlines. So if you're somebody who, maybe just realizes the night before that they have an assignment or maybe even misses it entirely, then, this is really for you. But even if you're good at keeping track of what you have coming up, it's good to see all 4 months at once in advance. And it's kind of an early alert system because most students will have a couple of weeks of the term that are particularly packed, like you might have a couple of midterms in the same week, or all of your assignments due at the end of the term in 1 week, or a bunch of exams coming up, maybe even worst case scenario, a couple in a day. And it's really good to get notified in advance if that's happening. Particularly if there's a conflict with your personal commitment. There might be a personal commitment that takes you out for an entire weekend. And then you notice like, whoa, I planned this personal commitment separately, not realizing that it's right before a week where I have a lot of deadlines. So it's a really good calendar to alert you for times when you really particularly need to plan ahead and maybe make some changes from your regular routine to allow yourself to succeed. So Kate will have given you, in addition to the 4-month calendar, a link to a video that I want you to watch. And it's about a 2-minute video that goes through step-by-step how to make a semester at a glance calendar, starting with your course outlines for all your courses. So I would like you to pause this recording, watch that video, and then open up the 4-month calendar. Make yourself a semester at a glance calendar. Ideally, make it single-sided so that you have 4 pages that you can actually hang on the wall and see every time that you walk by. And then come back to the video because there's more information and activities once you've made your semester at a glance calendar. So we figure the video will take you about 2 minutes. It might take you another 10 minutes or so to make your semester at a glance calendar. So pause now and then come back to the video when you're done. Okay, so now that you have made your calendar, I want you to use it to plan ahead. So think about what you noticed on your calendar. Did you notice that there are certain times or certain weeks of the term where you have a lot of deadlines and tests bunched up? If you notice that, when is that? Or you might possibly have some times where you have major personal commitments that conflict with school deadlines and tests. I hope that you don't have both of those together, but maybe you're going away for the Thanksgiving weekend or something, and realistically, maybe you have the best of intentions to get some work done, but realistically, it will interfere with getting your work done. So if you find some times with a bunch of bunched up deadlines, or even one major deadline, or if there's like a conflict with your personal life, then you should start thinking about how you're going to plan for those times. So hopefully you haven't discovered it's next week. Hopefully you might have discovered it's a few weeks from now. And that'll probably go better if you plan ahead. If you start planning for 3 weeks from now or a month from now, right away. So an example might be that you were planning to work some extra shifts one weekend, but you realize that your midterms are the next week. So at this point, maybe this is the time to notify your boss that you can't work the extra shifts after all, because if you delay and you let them know right before that week, they're a lot less likely to agree to that. So that kind of answers when are you going to carry out your plans? Probably you should carry out your plans right away to deal with a big crunch time. And also start thinking about how soon you need to start working towards your busy weeks. So if 3 weeks from now you have 2 midterms and a big assignment deadline, and say you normally study for your tests only a few days before, that probably isn't going to work with all of those things bunched up. So you might indicate on your calendar that, starting tonight, you're going to work towards the first midterm, or maybe you're going to try to do the assignment well in advance starting tonight so that you will have more study time for the exams. Okay, so we're going to move to the next 2 schedules on the 4-schedule system. And the first one is the master weekly schedule. So all that you put on the master weekly schedule are obligations that repeat at the same time every week. So your weekly classes would go on there if you have regular work shifts every week, if you have an extracurricular activity that happens at the same time every week, or a sport, or maybe your spiritual devotion happens at the same time every week. Put that on your master schedule. And you may want to do this electronically. Some people prefer that, maybe on your phone or on a computer, or you may be old school and you might want to schedule yourself on paper or using an agenda book or something like that. But I invite you to think of the master weekly schedule as something that's written on paper, and then you make copies of it, old school photocopying, for every single week of the term. And you don't fill them all out all at once. Maybe on a Sunday night when your week is coming up, you would take your master schedule. You would think about any specific things that you have happening that week. So maybe you have a dentist appointment on the Wednesday. You would add that into your calendar. Maybe you're celebrating a friend's birthday on the Thursday evening. You would add that into your calendar. And once that specific week's obligations are added in, you would enter things that can happen really at any time. And that would include studying. So you would put study blocks in your calendar. And if you notice this example, the study blocks are all fairly short, no more than 2 hours. They're dispersed very frequently throughout the week. So that's something to keep in mind because students' powers of concentration are not so great that you should study several hours of studying all at once. So, keep it pretty short. Have breaks even within a study block. If you find that your concentration is lapsing, go do something completely different, maybe physical, just to balance out the mental work. Also, you might notice that the study blocks tend to be before and after classes, and that can be really useful. So before class might be a good time to do the reading so that your mind is prepared for the information coming in. It might be a good time to read your notes from the previous week so that, in case the class builds upon what you learned in the previous week. And then for study blocks after class, it's a good time to, maybe keep working on an assignment that you might have started during class. The information is fresh in your mind. So, just continue working. Maybe you can get it all done. It's also a good time to maybe do the readings for next week when you have the fresh information that you can build on. Maybe review your notes that you took during the class. And then you would put in other discretionary things like socializing that has no particular time attached to it. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to my friend's birthday party this week, but I would also like to get together with some friends on Saturday. So I'm going to tentatively schedule it in for this time on Saturday, and I'm going to get in touch with them and see if they can do it. I'm going to schedule some gaming time because I can do that at any time, but putting it into my schedule might limit it and mean that I'm not, gaming all the time. And, maybe like if video calls with your family or whatever it is. And then I encourage you the following Sunday to look at your schedule that you had created the week before and think about what worked for you on that schedule and what didn't. So if you had a study block planned and it was super efficient, think about the timing of it. Think about where you were, whether you were with other people, like what made that study block work so well for you. And if you see some study blocks that did not work well, maybe you didn't even follow through with them, or maybe you had trouble concentrating, try to problem solve why you might not have followed through with them. Were you too tired at that time? Were you with somebody who was distracting you? Did you feel anxious and decide to do something else? Don't beat yourself up for study blocks that you haven't followed through with. Just be curious about why not. And then, just reflect on all aspects of your schedule on a weekly basis. And take that knowledge, the increasing awareness of what works for you and what doesn't, and bring that knowledge to building a schedule for the following week. So it's not about being perfect. And if you can't follow it perfectly, there's no point. It's about gaining self-knowledge from week to week and becoming better at building a realistic schedule that works for you rather than you having to turn yourself in knots to follow it. And then by the end of the term, probably you'll be pretty good at scheduling. The next system that we recommend are daily to-do lists. And that's just a list of, maybe 3-4 priorities that you have for the day that you really want to get done. I've seen graphics for daily to-do lists with, that are really long and detailed. And I actually think that's kind of counterproductive. So I've used these images intentionally, like really an effective to-do list will really prioritize what the essentials are, and it should be something that you could write on your hand or write on a post-it note or put on the background of your phone. It shouldn't be too complex and ambitious. It should be something that you can easily succeed on. And once you've succeeded on following your to-do list, it can create motivation to keep going and to keep setting goals and identifying priorities. So yeah, like just don't be too ambitious. Break it down to the essentials that you need to do. And I would like write the to-do lists either the night before every day or possibly the morning of if you wake up and you're not in a super rush and you have time to think about things. If you are somebody who has never had a written time management system before, like definitely I think the semester at a glance calendar is very useful for planning ahead. The master weekly schedule and the weekly schedule might be a little bit more than you can handle right away. So start by doing the daily to-do lists. And then sometimes people build on them by making prioritized lists for 2-3 days without times attached to them. And it can go on from there. So sometimes people will procrastinate because, maybe they have a really large task and it just seems huge and they don't know even how to get started. So a really good strategy is to break a big task down into steps. So an example is if you have a big paper to write, there's actually a tool on the SFU website, and this is the URL. You can look at it on your own, where you put in the date that you're starting your paper and the date of the deadline. And it will break it down into, I believe it's 8 steps or 10 steps. It's always the same steps. And then you notice that for each step, it gives you an artificial deadline for when that step should be done. And it also gives you some hyperlinks in case you need to learn more about that step or how to do it effectively. So for example, one of the later steps is to write your thesis statement. And there's some hyperlinks as to how to write an effective thesis statement. So this assignment calculator page is kind of a one-stop shop for giving you a writing process, keeping you going on the process step by step and providing resources to be more effective with your writing. I would highly recommend it. Not all tasks are going to have an online tool like that. So say you have a design project or, a math assignment with, many different questions or something, you could use this as a bit of a model to follow to break down that task for yourself. And also, say you discover on your semester at a glance calendar that you have a couple of tests coming up around the same time and you want to work ahead on them, but you don't really know how to get started, you could break down the process of studying for the tests by like what's in the course outline, what's going to be covered on the test. So, this is one topic that's going to be covered. I think it'll probably take this long to cover, and then you have a whole list and you have a time estimate for each exam, and then you can start moving those chunks of work into your scheduling system. This is another time that I would like you to pause the video and look at the handout that you've been provided with on 15 top time management strategies. The reason we've provided you with this handout is that I was saying before, like different people have different preferences about how they want to manage their time. So even, you could take a few people that want to make a weekly schedule, and some people will prefer it on paper, some people will prefer it on their phone, some people will prefer it on their computer. And it's the same with like other tools you might want to use or other strategies you might want to use. So this is a menu, think about it like a menu at a restaurant. And it's all the possible time management strategies that you can use. Well, maybe not all, but it covers 15 of them. And we'd like you just to take a look at it individually and to choose the ones that you're interested in trying. And then prioritize one that you will try in the next week. And it's good to prioritize one because what if like 12 of them look really good to you, and you're trying to try them all at once? It could basically lead to overwhelm and not really trying any of them, giving it a fair shake. So start with one, or possibly two if two of them can be combined. For example, the disconnecting strategy, turning off your phone, combines really well with the first 90 strategy, where you spend the first 90 minutes of a day working on a priority. So in that case, you could maybe combine two. So I would like you all to pause the video, identify one that you will commit to starting basically immediately, and write it down. So a final word about time management. All these wonderful plans will go out the window if you're too exhausted to follow through on them. And all your time estimates will take longer if you're too exhausted to be efficient in your work and to focus. So we really recommend that you put a priority on getting a good night's sleep, and even schedule a regular 8 to 9 hours of sleep into your weekly schedule. Like put it in your master so that you're going to go to bed and wake up around the same time and get about 8 to 9 hours of sleep. And the reason I'm saying 8 to 9 hours is that there has been a lot of research conducted on this, that university age students really need that for effective mental functioning. And if you don't get that on a regular basis, you're sabotaging yourself in your academic work. So the research also shows that students who get about 8 to 9 hours of sleep tend to do better than students who don't. And really, sleep is essential for so many things. Like, well, for one, following through on your plans. So if you have plans for a day and you're just way too exhausted, you probably won't do all of the things. Also for problem solving ability. I've talked to many math professors who have said that their biggest piece of advice for doing well in math is to get enough sleep, because problem solving is the first thing to go if you don't get enough sleep. Other things that will go are your ability to focus, your ability to remember things, also your ability to regulate your own emotions. So if you're prone to being stressed, you will be a lot more stressed if you're exhausted, and it can really cause your emotions to spin out of control. So I really recommend that you watch this video. It's just a 2-minute video called Why Sleep. So maybe after this recording, you can watch that one. So that is the end of the presentation, essentially. But I do want to tell you about resources and services that are available to you at the Student Learning Commons at SFU. So some of the services we offer are available to you and some are not as an FIC student. Basically, the group services are available to you, and the individual services such as writing consultations or conversation partners where it's one-on-one help are not available to you. So I would suggest starting on the left-hand side with the pink tile that says Find a Workshop. And that will take you to a list of live workshops that are being offered at SFU. Some of them are being offered virtually on Zoom. And you are welcome to attend any of those that you want, because we're already putting them on. So, we're not fussy if there's like an FIC student that's also watching, as well as our SFU students. It's totally fine. The more the merrier. Also, if you click on the Find a Workshop pink tile and you go all the way to the bottom, there's a link that takes you to workshop recordings. And that's where you can find more of these screencasts, like the one I'm making now. You can also sometimes find live recordings of Zoom workshops that we've done in the past, where the students have consented to it being recorded and made available. You can watch those on your own time. The other thing that's available to you you'll also find it under workshops, live workshops, conversation groups. We have Let's Talk conversation groups on Zoom and at the Burnaby campus and at the Surrey campus. These are weekly times where students will meet and get practice building their confidence talking in a group in English. Also, we have other resources that you can look at other than just the workshop recordings. And those colorful tiles at the top that say writing, learning and studying, and English as additional language are where to find a whole slew of resources. So under writing, there's resources about every step of writing a paper. You can find the assignment calculator there. You can find information about thesis statements, about how to proofread your own work, how to make an outline, all sorts of things. Under learning and studying, you can find more time management information. You can find information about how to write exams, how to study effectively for exams, how to take notes in class, how to read, but also even, things that are not as directly related to learning and studying, such as overcoming perfectionism, stress management, things of that nature. And English as additional language will list, all our English as additional language services under that one. And it will also have some self-help websites for learning English. So at this point, we don't want it just to be, oh, I came out of this session with a semester at a glance calendar and, one time management strategy that I'm going to try for the week. Those are good deliverables, but I'd also like you to write down a particular takeaway that you have from the workshop. Like, what was the most significant thing that you learned that you're going to take with you and act on it for the rest of your time at FIC and maybe moving into SFU. So thank you for listening, and all the best in your courses and your term.